I feel most colored when I'm thrown against a sharp white background. Beside the waters of the Hudson, I feel my race. Among the 1,000 white persons, I am a dark rock, surged upon and overswept. But through it all, I remain myself. When covered by the waters, I am, and the ebb but reveals me again, how it feels to be colored me. This new realm of exploration began as a potential lecture until I realized how considerably heavy the work is. Attempting to delve into the murky waters of an unwritten, to delve into the murky waters of an unwritten, though widely understood truth, that those of us blessed with darker skin, those of us who worship blackness and its mystical properties, are closest to the origins of this plane in realms unseen, would require so much time and dedication. And so, this first iteration is an experiment that I hope my audience can help me expand upon and shall be renamed Sifting Through the Rough for the Black Diamonds. I am sure of a few things. One, that my blackness is comprised of several compounds and contains the quintessence of this earth and beyond. Two, this world's dominators, marred by their commitment to spreading dis-ease and carnage, has done its best time and time again to erase the secrets of our ancestral holiness out of fear and more likely self-hatred. Three, in time, we, who were never meek nor originally Christian, will inherit and fortify everything around us, the indexes of our existence before this inheritance marked in our music and art. That final point to say our art, the imagery and theory we create, are not only evidence of our past greatness, but additionally a guide to where we will go in the future. So with that said, I think it's only best to start with Sun Ra. Because, I mean, of course, like, I think that a lot of people here know of, but definitely should know who Sun Ra is. But I want to specifically hone in to the idea of Afronautics. So does anybody, and I'm going to just start with this call and response, does anybody want to take a jab at what the Afronaut is, or what it embodies, or how it's reflected in Mr. Herman Poole Blanc's work at all? Anybody? I think you guys will warm up to me in time. But it's, you know, it's kind of, it's, you know, Afronautics is about like the idea of which like where like people of color have oftentimes tried to reclaim our stories, specifically Black people, people of the diaspora, through our, you know, through just looking above into this like cosmos. Here's like a good quote. Perceptible in this ripple of the Afronaut impulse is the yearning for and fantastical reclamation of an ennobling African history. A trip to space doubles as a return to roots. That's Jonah Viner on Sun Ra in Slate magazine in 2008. Of course, this is Sun Ra and all of his greatness. And to kind of like, you know, speak to some of the broader like notions of what Afronautics like supplies is like to looking through imagery of the ancient Egypt and Sumerian, like Nubian imagery in general, just to kind of extrapolate like what space travel looks like in the African past, and hopefully as like an index for what the future has to offer. Here we see like the sacred scarab holding a boat with this eye of Ra above it, and it's kind of a semiotic like way of like kind of you can extrapolate that this sort of like holy like ancient is carrying like, you know, this is the spaceship here. This is the index that we've always been space travelers, that we've always kind of extended beyond this plane in our imagery, in our art, and our culture. So of course, like, if anyone has ever seen Space is the Place, I hope that you guys have seen Space is the Place, because it's like, it's to die for. I think I'm just gonna like show you guys a clip, because it's like, it really speaks for itself. Let's just look at the intro and kind of, it's like literally the best part. I'm trying to talk about it.
different here. The vibrations are different. Not like planet Earth. Planet Earth's sound of guns, anger, frustration. There was no one to talk to on planet Earth to understand. We set up a colony for black people here. See what they can do on the planet all their own without any white people there. They could drink in the beauty of this planet. It would affect their vibrations for the better, of course. Another place in the universe, up under different stars. That would be where the altered destiny would come in. Equation-wise, the first thing to do is to consider time as officially ended. We work on the other side of time. We bring them here through either isotope teleportation, transmolecularization, or better still, teleport the whole planet here through music.
Space is the place, y'all.
Yeah.
So, like, I mean, yeah, like Sun Ra was onto something really crucial here. Was that, for one, that the world as we know it is doomed because of the way in which like racism and greed and a lot of other human or inherently, you know, colonialist values have, you know, just destroyed the population. And so in this diegetic framework, Sun Ra operates as Noah, and the arc is music. And that's kind of how, like, Sun Ra, like, that's what we like about Sun Ra in general, is that, like, through just kind of free-form jazz and of course, like, Sun Ra's infamous lectures, we can be transported to other places alongside him. Sun Ra, like, in the 30s, was transported to Saturn during a meditation, which reminded me a lot of, like, how the stories of the Jakarta tales and all the past lives of the Bodhisattva. One of the Bodhisattva's past lives was under a Bodhi tree, in which, in the wake of the Bodhisattva's like last iteration of self, they called to the earth to recognize that they were whole, and the earth shouted this vibration, eradicated evil all around them, and then transported the Bodhisattva to end like their karmic cycle. And I think that that's, you know, what, that is totally what Sun Ra is all about, and that's totally what Sun Ra reflects. Does anybody know, I know it's kind of small, does anyone know what that is there?
LSD.
Thank you, but that's not true. But like, yes, but like, no. That lovely molecule there, any more guesses? That's
melanin.
Yes, it's melanin. Oh my gosh, yes. We're getting into the black themes here. Okay. Yes, it's all about blackness, y'all. So like, you know, I wanted to bring this like into, because you know, this is something that people should be hyper aware of, is like, that is what it looks like on a molecular level. And that like, we should all be hyper conscious of what melanin represents and what it does to us, and how its like importance like really radiates through all human existence. You know, like in my mind, like, and especially thinking about Sun Ra, like melanin itself is a spacesuit, a ship, and a fuel cell. That is to say, it protects your body from various different radiations on top of ultraviolet radiation. It envelopes DNA and keeps it strong and impenetrable for successful reproduction. Melanin-rich skin and bodies more efficiently produce stable placentas, sperm, eggs, and induce successful egg implantation. Melanin is held capable of regulating a wide range of molecular interactions and metabolic processes. And there's like, and the list just goes on. The only thing is that like, we don't all know this, because there's been so many ways in which like melanin has been like kind of discredited and, you know, kind of flung into like some sort of back burner for a lot of different reasons. Like, I think a lot of people consider people that are like, melanin only kind of comes up when we're thinking about people with like extremely dark skin, or like just darker skin than like other people. Which brought me to kind of the antithesis of like, well, you know, like the quintessence of Sun Ra's work, but like tragically and historically the antithesis of Sun Ra's work, which is the Black Egyptian hypothesis. This was like a theory that black people dominated the region known as Egypt, Northern Africa, and fortified the mystique and infrastructure we all reference, admire, and whitewash. At the UNESCO Symposium on the Peopling of Ancient Egypt and the Deciphering of the Meroitic Code, or Script, in Cairo in 1974, the Black Egyptian hypothesis was met with profound disagreement. So like this is like a moment in history where like a bunch of black scientists, theorists, just you know, activists had all met in Cairo for something that like had oftentimes discluded you know, black scientists and theorists around the world with this hypothesis that all black people, or that black people come from and have dominated this region. So white people had found all different types of ways to disprove that that was true. But the real gag is that, like, you know, who could occupy Africa if not people that were African and therefore of varying different shades of black. So like, you know, the internet played a lot of games when I was trying to get to the facts of this matter. there was so much energy spent trying to disprove this theory and not nearly enough consideration for the idea that blackness has nuance now and then, and that there is still merit to the school of thought. For example, Wikipedia definitely had to tell me several different times, like I found this in so many different like places, like highlighting to disprove this theory that Ramses II was described as having a fair complexion and wavy ginger hair. Right, like no, but seriously, you guys should gag even harder at that, because it's like, this is what the internet provided me in trying to like validate this school of thought. This one instance in which you could like take blackness out of this leader and deity and, you know, just mystery in and of themselves, just to tell me that, like, you know, Egyptians looked like this and not like this. So does anyone want to take a crack at which one is the real National Geographic, the one that actually did go into print? So like this, I remember when this National Geographic came out, because like as a lot of people I know, I was so immersed in, like, you know, through my mother's like activism, considering myself of African descent and trying so hard to project myself into that world. And Egypt was the easiest way because it was the most like undeniably African, powerful, especially, I mean, speaking of myself as a young person, because of course there's evidence of like all of Africa being rich with history and magic and, you know, just power, then and now. But, you know, this is how people said that Egyptians looked over here. And it's not to say that they didn't. It's just the fact that like this was what people were considering, because no one would ever actually make this image, like, image real, especially for like a young, you know, the bloated angel of my childhood. So, like, you know, I just like wanted to point that out, just to like point out some of this colorism stuff. There was, let me just like call their name properly. So like, for one, there were a lot of tests that were trying to prove this idea of like, you know, of black people existing in Africa. You guys should have laughed at that, because of course black people lived in Africa. Regardless, melanin samples from ancient Egyptian skin, samples tested by Cheikh Anta Diop, theorist, historian, and advocate of the University of Paris, confirmed that these populations were without question to be classified amid black African demographics. However, these facts, this research was all rejected by other leading theorists at the time and even now. That's just like, I'm just gonna leave that with you for now. Let's move on to like, you know, how this, what this means like in our, like, don't worry about that one just yet. Like, we're gonna get back to like the soap dispensers, everybody.
Which doll is the black doll? And which one is the white doll? Which doll is the pretty doll? Which doll is the nice doll? Which doll is the bad doll? Which doll is the nice doll? And which doll is the bad doll? And why is that doll pretty?
Because she's white and he has 2 eyes.
Which doll is the ugly doll? Why is that doll ugly?
Because he's black.
Which doll looks most like you?
Like me?
Yeah, which one looks like you?
That one.
Okay.
So this experiment, oh yeah, no, please, like, let that sink in, because this experiment has been redone dozens of times since 1970, or I'm sorry, since 1939. The Clark's doll experiment grew out of the Mamie Clark master's degree thesis. They published 3 major papers between 1939 and 1940 on children's self-perception related to race. This is like, you know, I could bang on about this, but I think that we're aware of like the ways in which not having models of blackness and greatness, you know, connected, has taken away from young people and possibly people even in this room. Notions of black being deemed as hideous, as poor, as not as intellectual, or any number of different things. These things start at a very, very like young perspective. It's about like not seeing, you know, black children in cereal commercials until recently, and still seeing like so much backlash over like whatever the interracial black child in the Cheerios. I almost put that in there, but I just thought it was so ridiculous that people were actually like demonizing and vilifying this girl about corporations, you know, experiment, I think, with putting, you know, a black girl in a cereal ad. And you know, like this, like I was saying, like this has been done like dozens of times, and it did give a particular weight to the segregation reform in Maryland, but it still rings loud in the truths about the psychology of the child and how it's impacted by institutional racism and fallible American beauty standards, and so on. I just wanted to bring that up as I segued into the Black Panther Party. So now we're kind of getting more into like the color and the formalisms of black and how it relates to this whole subject. Can people like claim who these people are here? I know it said it above, but like just anyone. You could even just say one of the people's names. Okay, cute. So like you guys, I just wanted to make sure. I'm like not convinced that everyone's here. I'm just kidding. No, but this comes with just a quick anecdote. I used to have, and I still have, a shirt with these 2 men on it. And I got it when my mother went to the Million More movement, which was like, you know, second coming of the Million Man March that happened, I guess now maybe 15 years ago. She got the shirt for me, and like I guess it's starting to become clear as like I grew up in a very woke household. My mother told me to like wear it very proudly and to, you know, respect the legacy of these 2 individuals and what they stood for and what they fought for. And yet, Meredith Jeffers in my 5th grade classroom got me in-school suspension for wearing this shirt. So this is at the height of like, you know, the mall goth, Hot Topic, you know, seeing like, what do you call it, like brass knuckles on a t-shirt, like Marilyn Manson, like, you know, sewing his mouth closed and all this other shit. And like they actually like put me in detention for this shirt. So like, and you know, I still have it and I still wear it proudly, but I just wanted to like kind of get into like, you know, what this aesthetic actually does to the psyches of Americans. Would anyone like to point out some of the semiotic things that are working in this photo alone, as it relates to this party and what they represented?
The guns.
Okay, so the guns. That's unfortunately the first thing noted. Militants is definitely something that comes across.
Barriers.
Barriers. In what respect? Like that their bodies are.
Just setting a marker and wherever, not even in the ground, just in the air, just like I am a barrier. I am a presence that has to be acknowledged and respected.
A presence. Okay. Anything else?
Leather.
I was gonna
Confidence. Thank you for confidence. What were you saying back there?
I just said leather.
Leather. Yes. Yes, the leather. I think that, like, you know, those are all very crucial things. I like that presence and militants. In the barrier, the presence was something like noted, because this is all raptured in like the look of what they represented. Beyond like what these people did for all of us, the strides that they took and the legacy that they left, this look will always be marred in a particular light. And does anyone want to give a reason why I think that even now, like, this is like something that triggers people?
It's way too organized right now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, definitely that. But also, like, maybe if anyone wants to take a jab at a pop culture, like, appropriation of this imagery. Anybody remember, like, the Super Bowl? And, like, that lovely, like, Beyonce, Black Militants shout out, and what that meant in, like, context with, like, formation and whatever. I think that, like, people are still so jarred by what this looks like, and that's why it was so readily dismantled. I like that people are talking right now. So, like, does anyone want to take a jab at, like, what were the 10 demands? Like, you could just give me any one of the 10 demands that the Black Panthers called for during their, like, time in America, because they were also stationed in the UK and Algeria. But, like, what was the Black Panther 10-point program? Take a stab at any of it. There's no, like, stupid answers, because it is a really difficult question, but I'm just curious.
I'm not sure if I'm wording it correctly, but brothers will help brothers, sisters will help sisters, sisters will help brothers, brothers will help sisters.
Yes, that is number 9. We want all Black people, well, I'm sorry, that's like number 8, but it's about, like, it's literally about, like, what is the Milana Karenga term for it? Collective work and responsibility. Was like kind of the one of the pillars of it. Any other ones that you guys want to? The Black Panthers were about feeding the kids, y'all. Like, that was one thing. You know, like, the lunch program was serious. What else? They were armed, and they were policing police, following around, like, police officers and other white militants just to keep an eye on things.
Study groups.
Study groups.
And a real commitment to mass community base, like reading programs and collective intellectual endeavors.
Yes, definitely that.
Like, you didn't get that jacket until you read Mal's Red Book.
Do you want to, like, talk about that book? Because you know. No, I'm like, I don't want to, like, I really, it saves me, like, a little bit of time up here, and also, like, I love hearing it from your words.
No. So there's, like, all of this eroticism and, like, mass commodification of Black Panthers images, and oftentimes there's this way that we think about intellectual life and study and reading books as distal from Black working class experience. But in order to be part of the Panthers, you had to commit to read. Yes. You had to commit to read and study and engage in rigorous intellectual activity.
That's very true. Just to add a few more, the Black Panthers stood for wanting, like, a full employment for our Black people. They wanted, you know, decent housing and fit shelter for all human beings. They wanted Black men to be exempt from military service. They, like, you know, they want land, bread, housing, education, clothing, justice, and peace. That was number 10. We want freedom. We want power to determine the destiny of our Black community. We want full employment. We want to end the end of robbery by the capitalists of our Black communities. It's like they were out here, like, and they had a really, really tight agenda for all the things that they expected from the United States. And yet, all we can still recall is, and not to say that this picture is not iconic, but, like, we're always thinking about, like, this militants. That's the way COINTELPRO actually, you know, changed our perceptions of what the Black Panthers are. I'm gonna leave it there because I have a lot of stuff to get through. Oh yes, please.
Sorry, I mean,
from the photo you mentioned before, it was men. So actually, there are, you know, a lot of women who were really so pivotal in a lot of those programs.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, so I'm more familiar with like Elaine Brown, like just that was my in. So.
Absolutely. I think I was starting with like the imagery, not to rectify that, because like honestly, like it's there is such a very specific, you know, disproportionate like showing of black men in this context, and not like the black women with their fists up, you know, that were supporting people from the home and out into the streets, you know, them with their guns, like them policing police as well, and that's like really important to know.
Well, I also feel like one of the most important things about the Panthers is their take on the U.S., on America, in terms of like it already being fascism, and like acknowledging and like letting other people know that like this is already fascism, like the Nazis got it from America, you know, this is how they treated black and indigenous people from like the beginning of its inception. So like a lot of that has been like completely just taken out of like narratives on Black Panthers.
I mean, and, you know, that's definitely important now, especially in lieu of like the fact that like, you know, people are very quick to, even I like made a big stand about how people were so quick to mention like, you know, the Nazis, the Nazi presence in Charlottesville. And I was like, could we just like call them white supremacists and like kind of leave that loaded language behind? Because it's not to take away the story of what, you know, happened during the Holocaust and what was going on in Germany and like, you know, what importance of that. It's just like, it's about like the context and also like accountability. It's like, you know, here in this soil, we have had white supremacy like since its inception. And yes, Germany did like take a lot of its like, you know, imagery and inspiration from this context and transliterated it there. So it's like, and that's not to be forgotten at all, because it still functions on such a high level that we are like so quick to like call out a Nazi in the soil. But I'm like, you know, like, and they're using their chants and whatever, but at the end of the day, it's like, you know, they're just like, white supremacy is something that we just need to dismantle here, or at least just be able to call for what it is. So yeah, thank you guys for all your feedback during that. I think I want to come back to like some of these questions for a second. So, and you know, you guys all have a handout here, and like, so before I get into like the art, I just want people to consider like, how does blackness function in our imaginings of self? What does a high contrast black face make you feel in art and popular culture? When deployed as a mask or barrier, does the color black give power? Does it take power away? Are you aware of the ways in which the color black has and continues to be vilified and demonized on a hegemonic scale? So like, you know, just before I begin going into like black art, I just want you guys to consider these things as we move forward. But before, I guess like this isn't actually lighthearted, but let's start.
All right. So watch this. Black hand, nothing. Larry, go.
Larry.
Black hand, nothing. Larry, go. Racist mother 6.
Racist mother 6, y'all. Okay. So we talk about like the photographic apparatus and how it itself is colorist and racist. Can anybody supply any evidence of like the ways? I'm sorry, I pulled out my fan because I'm like, it's hot as hell in here.
The Shirley card.
Thank you. Thank you. Who was that? Yes, because I'm going straight into that because you mentioned it. Does anybody know who these 3 white women are? Wait, I mean like, who is she? No. This is Shirley. Everybody, this is Shirley. This is the way in which all digital and analog cameras are color calibrated, y'all. So every time you've taken out a camera and taken a picture of yourself from a range of different skin tones, this is how they calibrated the color. Is there anything explicitly wrong with that? I didn't think so. I'm just kidding. This is Kodak's attempt, I'm sorry, it's a small image, but this is Kodak's attempt at like actually, you know, diversifying it. But you'll never see this image because it was rarely used. It was never used. There was a time in which on television, as color became, you know, more prominent, that there were white women in various different color dresses, and obviously of different, you know, very specific body type and beauty aesthetic, that would enter onto the stage, the sound stage, and they themselves would color calibrate all television. So whenever you think about even like the presence of black people not being on television from its inception, you have to consider that like this is how they were calibrating, you know, our photographic apparatuses. This hogwash. Is this the new Shirley card of the future? This this is what, like, you know, National Geographic thinks that people will look like in a very near future. It is an obvious erasure of darker skin and just typical African, or just varying different skin tones and beauty aesthetics and body types. There are a few of these different images, and I guarantee you, like, none of them are as dark as me. None of them have like facial structures like me. It is to aestheticize the parts of people that we want to see in the future, and that itself is dictated by whiteness. And that is such a drag. Let's see it at work, everybody. So this is how cameras capture these women of color. And I know some people in here, you know, have been photographed in print and circulated on the internet. And I just want to like take a note of the fact that this is something that at times we can't even reclaim because it's technological racism. And yeah, that's a gag. I mean, like, what they did to poor Lupita over here, I'm like, she's so gorgeous, and the fact that you had to highlight her with just obvious white. And this is just a color theory moment. This isn't about, like, you know, aesthetics. It's just about, like, highlighting skin with whiteness. That's not just light. That's how the camera is interpreting you and me and them. And that is, like, always really, like, screwed. Speaking directly to the soap dispenser fiasco, that dispenser and a lot of other dispensers that we use nowadays are manufactured by a British company called Technical Concepts. that's so fucking funny. According to experts on the device, it uses near-infrared technology which sends out invisible light from an infrared LED bulb for hands to reflect the light back to the sensor. And the reason the soap doesn't foam just all day long is because the hand acts to more or less bounce back the light and close the circuit. So, I mean, obviously we saw the video, it's like, it doesn't seem to work. Has anybody ever experienced that with any sort of infrared technology before? Does anybody here have an Xbox Kinect? Has that not worked for you before? How about like a Wii? Has anyone ever like had to struggle with that? What about like just filters on your Snapchat, photo booth? All of these things are not picking up how dark you are. Even if you're not like, you know, my skin tone or darker, some people in here just for having certain facial structures are not being registered in these technologies. And that's because, again, let's just blame Shirley. Let's bring her back over. There goes Shirley.
Oh my God.
There she is. And, you know, and that's what we're struggling like with currently. The photographic apparatus is optimized for white skin. You know, like you had like Jean-Luc Godard, like, you know, did a film in Mozambique and like returned like all the films and dismantled like most of the project because he himself had to call out the fact that the cameras weren't picking up the people there. Wasn't actually like displaying the richness of the subjects there. And that's like really screwed. But then there's also even worse like examples of this. There are algorithms that, you know, file. So like a Google search, for example. If you just Googled people, you would get a range of different people, correct? If you Googled animals, you get a varying group of animals. There have been instances in which black people have ended up in a cache with apes, monsters, all different types of different varying like reflections of what black people aren't. But time and time again, this is always blamed on the algorithm actually, you know, still calibrating and learning. But the fact that it was programmed in such a way that that could be a mishap of that algorithm is the real like source of the issue. Not that like people like, wait, do I have the image of? Okay, so this photograph, so this is Hewlett-Packard's uneven facial recognition stuff. So like this man was, this photograph is by Corey Deschon. This man's name is William. He was in a cache with apes, and to the point that like it took like 1 million signatures to get that removed and rectified. Oh. And it's just like, you know, and I just don't even know what else to say about that. That just speaks volumes for what it is. This isn't the first time. Just a few months ago, like a series of like black high school students were like together taking their high school senior photo, and it ended up in like some sort of like blackface tribal like Google like engine something or other. And it's just like, this is a consistent problem because the actual technology at this level is colorist. That blackness is that deeply vilified that it's on a technological level is really disheartening. There's not even much more to say about that. But you know, of course, like there are a lot of different ways that people of color have taken back blackness in their imagery, and that is what I was really sifting for. So that concludes like kind of the shit heel of this presentation. I think we should move into Glenling on for starters. Has anyone seen this piece before? Has anyone ever heard anyone read it aloud? You guys should all say yes because I read an excerpt of it earlier. Glenn Lingon is a very important artist and widely recognized for the ways in which like blackness has been like taken into his hands to highlight, you know, absence, to display new truths, and also to just play with like, you know, the aesthetic of blackness on a white background is kind of like Glenn Lingon's calling card. Let's like just see what you guys feel about this imagery here. What do you think about this? Does this ignite any sort of impulses, any sort of thoughts? No?
It feels kind of like medical examining or something.
That is a thread that will come about in the future.
Or like mugshot. Yeah.
It's a mugshot too, right? Seeing a black man in this context should be all, well, you know, not all too familiar, but as in like to say that like this evokes a very specific reference. And this is kind of some of the imagery that like Lingon is playing with. There are also images in which like he screen printed like images from like the Million Man March to highlight the absence of black women there. You know, like taking, you know, the blackness, the contrast to extrapolate about what masculinity looks like on black skin, what power looks like in black numbers. This is kind of some of the front of Glenn Lingon's work. And this is him here. I keep all the images of the artists as the last part because I want their art to kind of speak for themselves. But if you ever see this man walking on the street, now you know like what kind of stuff he's made. Does anybody know who this artist is? Yes! Say it louder. Okay, this is a... Sorry? Oh, Lord have mercy. Oh, goodness. It's not my laptop, guys. I'm just kidding. Let me see. Thank you. Is it good? Okay. Alright, sweet. Kerry James Marshall is a master at what he does and what he evokes. And that's just important to say because when that show was here, I remember I was walking through it and just so awed by, I'll tell you a little bit more about my experience, but like one of the first things I noticed was hearing like a white couple look at like one of these pictures and say, oh, like, he's really good. Like, no, Kerry James Marshall is not good. He's a master at what he does. taking blackness to this level and like forcing it back onto us so that we can look at it and just go wild with our imagination. That his imagination could extend so far that it can touch all of us in one way or another. And this specific like Edenic imagery, it made me think about like, you know, like with the richness of color behind and these black figures, it made me think about how black they really are, which I know is beautiful. But you want to know one of the most tragic things is that walking through, all I could think was like the young part of me, again, this bloated angel, looking at these images and like taking fear out of them. Looking at skin so dark and never disgust, but somehow finding fear in it. That this Eden in particular, even though it seemed so close to me, was still something that triggered me. And it made me think about all the young brown and black people walking through this show and like what it must be like to see this. What does this image, this self-portrait, so-called, evoke in any of your minds? Just like this display, is there anything like that, like any other reference that you can just kind of like...
That like schoolyard joke?
Oh, okay, hold on, I'm sorry. What'd you say?
It's like the Cheshire Grin.
The Cheshire Grin? Okay, that's a good optical like reference. Cheshire, well, as in like, you know, the Cheshire cat, which is invisible at times and oftentimes is just rendered to a face with very, you know, specific facial structures pushing through.
Like that, like kind of like schoolyard joke or schoolyard thing where it's like, I don't know if other dark-skinned people experience this, but like we're in their classroom and the lights turn off and a student says, "Can't see Jasmine," or "You can't see the darkest person in the classroom because the lights are off."
And they say
yeah,
smile.
It's exactly, or say smile, or like...
It's that the whites of our eyes and teeth are all that you can see, and that's how dark we are. You know, this colorist, like, backwardsness. Anybody getting any of that gollywog imagery yet? That, you know, mammy, pickaninny stuff just yet? Because it's coming. This image here, I was really taken aback by. Can anyone make out anything in this?
Yes.
Okay, so like what are we seeing here? Is
Black
there
Panther
anything?
flag at the top.
Yeah.
Black Panther up here.
Two people laying in bed.
There's two people laying over here.
The book. What's the book called?
Carrie James Marshall often, yeah, I'm like, what is this? Carrie James Marshall is a master at capturing at once the familial and the interpersonal, whilst also coding it through the color black and the aesthetics of black, and therefore absence and contrast and, you know, like a sort of shroud. It's hiding something, but it's also pushing something through. And I think the most visible thing for me, I was shocked when I was looking at this, was the Black Panther flag there. I was so interested in the fact that that's what's most prominent in this imagery. And I think it just goes without saying that this is a master because like Carrie James Marshall's mission is to kind of fill a museum setting with blackness, always. In its absence, he's filling it, and he's filling it with black, which is oftentimes like a shroud, a concealer. Yes, Carrie James Marshall. Yes. Wait, just a few more seconds. I'm just kidding. Yes, a master at what he does. Does anyone know who this activist artist is? Zanelli Miholi. I'm just so mad about this person because she is so unapologetically black in the sense that she is just an activist at heart. She wants like for her existence and the existence of her community to be present and to be like not villainized and to be safe and comforted. Also a master. Speaking of like, you know, the photographic apparatus and its racism, like looking at this image and that she herself is flung up against a white background and has darkened her own skin. And then one of the things that like, you know, is very, perplexing about this series of self-portraits I'm showing is this adornment around her neck. What is that giving you? What is this image giving you? So you're getting something from technology. What are you getting?
A modern noose.
A modern noose. National Geographic. Are we speaking to I'm just gonna interrogate that just a little bit. Are we speaking to, when we mention National Geographic here, what aspects of this? Just curious.
Like an ethnographic National Geographic.
So like a cataloging, the many faces of Africa. I hate that. I'm sorry. I can't even deny. I kind of hate that notion. I think that her gaze is so direct that it's confrontational. I think that her stance and posturing is assertive. But I think that noose and this color, the composition of the photo, there's something at work here. Let's look at the next one. Again, we see this white and black contrasting again. We're seeing this again. What are we getting here that might be the same or different? We talk about adornments. For starters, the hair is a focal point in both of these images, or the crown. There is an ethnographic quality to speak to, the notions of how we've looked at Black or African indigenous beauty as, being a series of distinct hairstyles and adornments. What's going on with this lip, though? So twice we're seeing some sort of vocal gesture being assumed with whiteness. How about another one? And this time the gaze is not on you. This isn't confrontational. What is it? I think it's interesting from this self-portraiture that she is playing with the ideas of being silenced, because that is what a lot of her work is attempting to unravel, is the idea of there's being a voicelessness to the stories of LGBTQI people in South Africa, specifically lesbians, African lesbians, and that her herself she has such an intricate story. Recently, Zanel about 6 hard drives of her work was robbed from her home in Johannesburg. Now I know there's some artists here, and that is such a blow to have archives of your work robbed from you. It's proof that she's on the right path and that she's doing something really critical. But this imagery, to me, is it speaks directly to that. Is that how easy it is to silence a woman like her. How easy it is to take it away.
It also feels like Blackness as a silhouette to be archived, to be categorized. And here's the silhouette of this type of Blackness, here's a silhouette of this type of Blackness. All of these things can be reduced to this image of Blackness. That goes in this file, that goes in this file.
Is that an extension of this ethnography of Black imagery, sort of this aesthetic of posturing and photography cataloging?
Yeah, photo bucket tropes of just okay, that's where those things go. These are my inspo. This is the heritage, and all these romanticized ways that things are cataloged and not given their individual due.
And how does it function in her hands as self-portraiture? Does it give power? Does it take it away? Is it more complex?
I mean, it's hard because power as a Black artist, it depends on the days. I feel like creating work the potential for my figures to be consumed as queens under gaze is very high, and a Black person to be consumed as a queen under gaze is a potential experience. So I feel like each individual seeing the work is going to have a different way that thing functions. For her, I feel like it's highlighting the way we want to do that to her as an artist.
It's real. The gaze is a factor in photography in general, who's looking upon it. I think that I'm about to get into kind of the politics of the gaze in a moment. But first, shout out to this lovely, lovely family. Oh geez, what is, give us our face. No. Silly. We did get to look at her, but like, you know, I wanted to render her in color here, but you know, okay. I'd like to skip Kara for a second, and I'd like to talk about the work of Geneva Ellis. I had the privilege of having a really brilliant conversation with this artist about a range of different things, and you know, just like in her recent show, Lick Shot, in New York, it was just a really critical show. Does anybody have any comments about this image entitled Mother and Child? No images yet? I mean, no thoughts just
I'm
yet?
getting like King Kong vibes, but also something about but also like ripping away at something. Like, I'm curious what animal that is. Like, I can't.
This beast.
Yeah.
Mother and Child.
The first time I saw this, a few months ago, I read the title first, so I walked up onto the painting sort of kind of already developing, or I guess working back from like some idea that had developed in my mind. But I was very much spent a lot of time trying to figure two things. One, the reality of how most African Americans are raised with a level of violence that is considered like we should look upon it in an endearing way. Like, it's what made us, but really it's like one of the things that's kind of constantly just like, you know, we're surviving through. That, but then also wanting to work away from that and not have like this thing of like, oh, like fuck my mom type of thing. But yeah.
Let me just quote the abstract, or part of the abstract from Lick Shot. Like a shot fired from a dream, laughter in the dark, or an underwater scream, this exhibition is a series of glimpses into the divine comedy of existing in a world where pain is met with doubt. Into dynamics that are blatant and never-ending, yet constantly denied their truth. Playfulness provides a brief reprieve from spiraling. Run headlong into a brick wall or be sprung by a rubbery spring. If one is blunt, the other is jovial and forgiving. A score of hits and recoveries, each collision wipes the shock of the last one with a fresh sensation. I want to like kind of come to this idea of the divine comedy. I think of those words as very separate. They're divine, like the pieces themselves are divine in that they illuminate a forgotten or ignored truth. Divine in that the imagery resurrects a referential memory in the minds of the American populace, or just the viewer in general. Commedia, like, you know, like the Latin of comedy, with which divine comedy speaks to speak to the voice embedded in the medium, the legacy of illumination. Comedy like the awkward, poorly suppressed laughter of an uncomfortable observer. Comedy in the sense that cartoons conceal and reveal in the same exact way. These figure paintings are so lit. I think that what Geneva was kind of getting to was this kind of slapstick element that was at once very macabre and also very wry. In a discussion that we had, I inquired about like these kind of cartoon images. cartoons, like in Geneva's mind, are like a means of reducing, of like getting to the point. It's a shorthand. Identifying with characters like Daffy Duck, because some of these figures being a figure to project a child's wealth of familiarity onto. Like there is like this way that cartoons can communicate horror very quickly. An extension of humor, a new language of communicating pain. What's triggering about this image to anybody here?
Blackface.
Blackface?
Also the removal of blackness
from So like that there's something going on between like the removing of the black or wearing the black. Anything else? What kind of images is this kind of like, is this collaging, so to speak? Or like how is it kind of like, how does it function like as a series of different scenes almost?
It's almost, I mean, for me it's almost as, there's two images happening. One, the typical one we would see of the black woman being mammified behind and a white woman sitting, and then her child who she's neglecting at her feet. But in this particular case, it's a white woman attempting to be black, raising what could be a white or biracial kid, and then a white mother matriarch behind. But yeah.
There's a, I think that Geneva used the term representation of distress. That's apparent in Scambient Pet, which is the name of this piece. Like, you know, this kind of bloodied cartoon character down here, and kind of like no way of like knowing who is at fault, or like, you know, knowing that there's a victim, but not knowing what, like, who's the perpetrator. It is acting as a shorthand here because we're getting little glimpses of things that trigger us, but it's very, very like nuanced, and I think that that's a really important thing about this show. I think that also Geneva used the term the scam of ambiance in reference to this image in particular, but I think it rings true through with the show itself. Let's do What's this doing? I had a lot of questions about this one, but I kind of had to suspend a lot because I was just like, there's so much going on. What are you guys thinking about it? Oh, come on.
He's giving a lot of, like, this is the same artist from 3 frames ago?
Yes. Yes.
I'm getting a lot of, like, vagina dentata.
The teeth, okay. The teeth.
That's what I thought of with the first monster.
I'm kind of getting like features that tell that someone's black, the nose, the mouth, and kind of like consuming what, like these telling signs as being like what kind of divides these two faces.
I'm seeing a lot of like anger in the face that's being zipped off, and then behind it's just like sadness. I don't know.
I thought about it as relief. I kind of had this moment where I this gave me the can you feel a brand new day, like that kind of whiz moment, like a little bit, I kind of was like, but it was a little bit reversed because like the dark monstrous in the Wiz was being zipped off to reveal these gorgeous black dancers. But like there's something else functioning here. I see this face back here as like being relieved of something, but I'm not entirely sure of what. Again, how does blackness function here?
It's so flat and so...
Right, like a lot of detail is in this mask, or in what's being zipped off, or possibly zipped on.
I think it's a zipper is being like silencing.
And the eyes like crying to me, or like sad, like watery.
We're getting into the color a little bit more. Can anybody like take a jab at any of the other colors that are functioning here besides just the black and brown?
The red.
What's that red giving you? What's that like? Kind of how are you imagining that? Or like what does that trigger? I'm really interested in the ways that these images in particular trigger you because I find them to be so nuanced that they just are a collage of a lot of sentiment and distress that we have in us. But it's not saying that to you. It's not explicit. It's a language of distress. And I really appreciate that. According to Geneva, we must all consider and interrogate the canon of looking. As we investigate imagery, we are not always conscious of the language of images being conveyed or our charted referential memories. As we look, we can be stupefied by images that trigger or inflamed by imagery not easily palatable. The choice lies at the poles of the active, critical onlooker and the passive, reactive onlooker. Considering that her works from Lickshot, and incidentally a lot of the other works we investigate, are in proximity to a history of violent imagery that we can easily react to using our referential cache, Geneva attempts and succeeds at transliterating the references, repurposing these triggers into new representations of distress. A new language for communicating pain, using cartoons at times as a shorthand. And honestly, you should Google this lovely being. Who may or may not be in this room right now. And I'm not so sure. I think that that's a great segue to talk about Kara Walker, honestly, because there's something else, and it's kind of polarized. I think that this is very explicit. Are you guys familiar with Kara Walker's work? How is this functioning here? What things are we extrapolating here? Not even extrapolating. What are you extracting here?
Is the black or white again?
Yes, the contrast is very present in her work.
It's pretty generational, a lot of different depictions of bodies and ages and genders.
It's narrative in that way. I think that it goes without saying that, well, maybe not, but Kara Walker was definitely into genre painting in school, or, and probably still is, and that there's something that's very present here. Kara Walker is also really into the psychorama, just people who know what that is. It's like this subliminal messaging that images can flash so quickly in front of you that you don't actually register what they are, but you still somehow are processing it on a subconscious level, which is so interesting, seeing how they're so narrative. Seriously though, but what are you seeing here? Just pick out objects or things. What was that?
A white guy fucking black chick.
Okay, there's a white guy fucking a black chick who is. Wait, I'm just taking I'm taking what Sarah said. It could also be a weirdo race. Sarah? No, I'm just playing. It is one leg, not two. You could tell from the bodies that there is nudity here. It's not implied, it's explicit. What is she picking?
A flower.
She's picking cotton, y'all. Quit acting crazy. Look at it.
It is a flower, though.
It is a flower.
It is a flower.
Right. It is a flower.
Steeped in fucked up history, but it's a flower.
It is a flower, y'all. I understand. I understand.
It is a flower.
What about this baby over here?
It's like she's walking over demons, man.
I know. Well, I mean, that's lit. That's really lit. But it could just be grass. But that's lit. I think that the baby should evoke this gollywog or tar baby imagery, especially since she's black and rendered without any details but her nappy hair. It's a pickaninny. Okay. Let's keep going. There's a little bit more nuance here. What's going on here? Tell me what's going on.
Circumcision?
Why would she be circumcising this child with her mouth?
I don't know.
They do, come into contact with it in certain faiths. But I think that this one is explicit because the images themselves are still endowed with the same pain and the same reference of the pickaninny of this Jezebel.
Jezebel, you said? Jezebel?
Jezebel, oh, did we know what?
Jezebel,
sorry, not Jezebel, sorry, Jezebel. Forgive me. This Jezebel, okay, fine. I think that there's like, you know, there's something about these images that evokes like very specific references. And I wonder if that's being conveyed. Let's do one more. What's the merit of having these images exist? I'm not being, you know, I'm not trying to be like, I'm not shutting it down. I'm just saying like, how does this function in context with, you know, Black art and expression? What does this reveal? What?
Our history.
Is it? Oh, okay.
I mean, it's the reality of our history. It's really, I mean, I go in and out of it myself, so I'm part of the comical, but it is really comical to watch people get up in arms about Carl Walker's work, because it's just like, pick up a book, boo-boo, like this is our history, and like this is the reality, like this is, you know, like of course it's never going to be depicted this way in a book, because, you know, but. Well, it has.
It has been explicitly like laid out in literature that's also been canonized in ways that like we've all like read, like, you know, To Kill a Mockingbird and like all types of other like different shit that we're fed about our history.
It like reveals these kind of like shadows that we still recognize. The fact that we can tell someone's Black by the way that their hair is standing up, the way that we can tell someone's a white man by the way he's standing and stuff like that.
Right.
It kind of evokes the fact that we can still feel and understand and read these shadows as relating to slavery, that like it still has some like palpable effects into now.
Fucked up.
Also, just like as if there's a pleasant way to depict the horrors of truth. Like it's like I feel like so many depictions are these like tactful allusions, but this is kind of just like let's just call it what it is. It's not the ugly truth; it's the truth. You know what I mean? Like as if there were a pretty one.
It's to call a spade a spade.
Right.
Is it fair to consider this recycled narrative and loaded imagery to be redundant or empty?
Or what?
Redundant or empty.
Is it unfair or fair?
Is it fair, or is it fair to do that? Like, would you consider some of these images or this recycled narrative to be redundant?
I mean, as a nigga who don't want to see this shit all the time, yes. But like once again, it's our history, and it's like not an ugly or beautiful truth. It's just the truth. So.
When considering our pain, even in the silhouettes of our pain, as a commodity, is that something that comes into factor? Because I remember somebody mentioned the gaze or the onlooker. Is this a commodification of pain?
I mean, she's a part of it.
She's a part of it?
It's a commodity itself. It's being purchased. It's a purchasable work. It's within the realms of capitalism. It's being exposed to a widely white canon, and it's being purchased by white people. So, you know, there are questions about who gets to commodify Black pain.
Right.
As, you know, recently became stark in the art world.
Yeah.
But like,
in lieu of the Whitney,
who's the
like
gatekeeper for commodifying Black pain? Who can do it and who can't do it? And when does therapy and self-expression like translate into commodifying Black pain? As a Black person, making work like that and questioning that within yourself, creating more Black images to be consumed by non-Black people that depict pain and suffering.
And just one other question. I'm mostly devil's advocate here. Is the work acting as an index of history, or has it lost its potency without nuance? Is it so explicit that it's not even potent? I've heard people kind of shrug at the fact that this is our history.
Like, who's curious what Drake's album is gonna sell? You know what I mean? It's like, we know. So when does an image like this stop being critical? You know, how many times, and for who? You know what I mean? The first time you see it, whether you know it or not, whether this is new information, it needs to exist, but you have to contextualize what that question means for the people.
It's like where it should exist is like the thing is like always like never focused on.
Yeah, yeah.
That's a really good piece. Carol Walker, everybody.
Well, I also think that there's something really interesting about what Kara is doing in terms of like working with the binary between ugliness and beauty, and that we are taught that what is beautiful is virtuous and moral. And what happens when we have been our aesthetic sensibilities have been trained to find the terrible beautiful. And so like those pastoral images are often evoked as like the sign of beauty.
The genre painting.
Yeah. But there's like so much terrible that is inside of that a particular aesthetic. And so it disrupts this idea that equates beauty with morality and the just.
Right. The formalism alone, if we were just talking about the formalism, this is breathtaking.
Yeah.
To see it on a wall rendered so big, the posturings of the individuals, of the subjects, and also like kind of just still there is nuance in formalism here. And you know, like I could sift through like all the artists here about like just like how formalism functions, like just in itself, it's just breathtaking imagery. It's still loaded imagery. It's loaded to make Adam and Eve black, this black, you know. It's loaded to you know, call upon these images to evoke this sort of this pain. Considering formalism is like a very key like point of this is, you know, blackness is not just, you know, a statement. It's also just a color. And Maleko Magosi. There's just so much. This is one of my new favorites as well. What are we seeing here? Anything functioning here?
So there's schoolgirls.
There's schoolgirls.
And missing girls.
You said a cross out. An erasure. Blackness here used as an erasure. The fact that you can even see the strokes. You'll see like kind of, again, we're coming back like talking about formalism in this piece, Pax Capraria by the Botswanan artist Maleko Magosi. When I tell you these pieces are big and breathtaking, oh my gosh, are you serious? So this is gonna be the other image that doesn't, are you joking? No! That's so screwed. I'm just gonna Google it, because I think that like we also like really do need to see that. This artist is oftentimes like trying to critique, especially in this piece, is discussing, you know, or bringing a lot of like interrogating Africanness, whiteness, colonialism, tackling a range of different like subjects through these breathtaking images. Blackness in his paintings oftentimes functions as like an accessory, but oftentimes also as an erasure. The image I was going to call upon was this one with police officers around a child, where you can see kind of part of, you can tell that they're police officers from their stance, from what you can make out from like what they're like, you know, what they're wearing. But they're entirely enshrouded. But then around, you know, these schoolgirls in their uniforms, and you know, animals, which were huge and breathtaking. Sometimes there was more detail on the dogs and oxen than on power figures. There's one image in particular that just would not load, and I want to see if I can find it. But there's like a wedding scene. I wonder if people can see what's going on here. Do you see this woman over here? This is like a very traditional like wedding garb, right? But it's all black. She's carrying white lilies, and her train is being held by a bunch of, I mean, I guess you could be like Secret Service like men. Definitely not, you know, her maids of honor. And so, and her expression, if you could see it, is super like, it's kind of blasé, doesn't know what's going on. She's marrying this guy who's sitting. He seems unenthused, you know. there's like this sort of narrative perspective that's being like evoked by like his work is like, you know, to call into question like history as well. That like some of these things could transcend like these practices, or like that these like bodies even can transcend space and time in this diptych or triptych. And like I think that it's just really important, like this work for, you know, what he chooses to erase and what he chooses to, you know, make explicit. That there's hope in some of these images, but also something really macabre. And you know, I just think that like he's an amazing artist that everyone should look into as well. Such a master painter of his own right. In conclusion, because now I'm excited to like have people like, you know, talk back to me and others in a larger capacity. Again, I'd like you to consider those questions that are printed out. I'm glad that everyone could like sit with me and actually, you know, kind of stew in what blackness means and how it makes you feel and how it works and functions in these artists, in these theorists, in this imagery on a technological scale and pop culture. I'm gonna leave out, you know, Fatty Boom Boom. We don't have to talk about her crazy ass. You know, we don't have to talk about her. We don't have to talk about, you know, blackface and, you know, adornment with blackness on white skin. I think that that's corny. I think that we've seen it. I think we know it's wrong, I hope. And I think that we should all be, like, you know, critical of it, but I don't think that I want to take up my time with it. But I always like to, like, leave off on, like, a musical note. So, it's your choice. Would you like to watch? Okay, wait, or Black Skinhead, Kanye. I don't know if there's like some people. Okay, so we're gonna do that. All right. Let me just like I'll just pull it up over here. Yes to your Rapunzel. Like let's do it, y'all. I fucking live for this.
Again, I'd like it to feel very open. If you hear a question that you didn't want to answer, please raise your hand. I'm going to ask my questions first and then opening up to everybody else's questions. So just keep your questions, but if you want to answer something, please feel free. These are very open-ended questions. Okay, so I'm going to start off with describing our wonderful panelists. Thank you again for being here to discuss the breadth and beauty of Jahmal's work and of just rich soil that we have here to grow from. So Sarah is a painter, writer, poet, actress sometimes. All around great, wonderful artist that you will see around town. And Sarah recently had a solo show at Human Resources around the corner. And yes, and I invited her to be in this panel because I love the concepts that she has around dreaming and about ideas of like how writing can become ritual, reading from your journals. All of it feels like it has like a very deeply spiritual element because it's so intuitive. It's something that you came to art for your own, for yourself, not through school or through like forced, like you came to it on your own. And I think that heart-led kind of practice is something that can connect a lot of different people. It's beautiful. And then Kelman is a visual artist, DJ, and producer from New York. And I invited Kelman along to this panel because I wanted him to talk about his latest album, 1804 Kids, and to talk about Rail Up and his experiences as a producer who usually showcases Afro-Caribbean music and shows a very, like such a unique set than other DJs and producers I've seen around LA. And I wanted to bring that richness to the panel as well. So my first question is to you, Sarah. I'm curious about the role of dreams in your work. And then I remember you talking about how sometimes you paint things from your dreams, from memory. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that, and especially related to the painting, which I will bring up, of you flying toward the moon. And I was wondering about your relationship to dreams and how coming to a painting while relating it from a memory, how that affects your relationship to the work. I'm going to pull up the work as you talk.
So paintings are really important. Well, art in itself is really important to me because there is the constant threat and act of erasure of the Black existence. And dreams have been like, dreams of spirituality and Black culture have been one of the things that have been the hardest to erase and or control from whiteness and white patriarchy and whatnot. So it's something that continues on. So this is called Me and My Attempt to Rise Above It All and to be floating above a puddle in the middle of the jungle. I paint myself naked because I am a nudist and that is how I am in my dreams. Yeah.
And I'm really curious about, what I love about this painting is that it's yellow surrounding your body, and yellow is such a powerful color for me because it reminds me of like radiance and of the sun, and it is something so self-regenerative about it. And so, yeah, I wanted to bring that up. And why at night? Like, why are you going toward, like...
I'm a night owl, and in my dreams, it's usually nighttime.
Okay.
Yeah, so, like, yeah, it's usually nighttime.
Okay. And then, Kelman, I was hoping that you could tell us a little bit about the title for your album and about what pushed you to create the work under that title.
Cool. So I'm gonna kind of give like
there we go.
I'm gonna kind of give like a long-winded answer because if I just talk to you about the album, it's gonna come off like some hipster conceptual album, which somebody accused me of.
Can y'all hear?
Anyways, last week I went back to New York and someone who I knew before and I met him at a club, he really didn't like the title of my album, which is 1804 Kids. 1804 refers to the Haitian Revolution, and it's a reggaeton album. It's pretty basic, it's pretty emotional, if you just listen to it for what it is, there's not, unless you force it, which is what a lot of conceptual DJs do, they try to justify their music through claiming that it's anti-capitalist, et cetera, et cetera. And that's something that I didn't want to do. So I just wanted to talk about like 3 key points in how I came up with the title of the album. So I make videos is what I started doing. I make music as a hobby, but somehow they've kind of like melded. And I've been going to South Dakota for maybe like 5 years now, and that's why I make videos. And I've noticed that because it's a reservation, it's much easier to try and describe the specific aesthetics and the fabric of a place when you're literally in an open-air prison, because that's what a reservation is. And because there's 1,000 people, you get to learn about they're all cousins really. You get to learn about a community in a very small fraction, which I think is harder for me to do in Los Angeles, because it's not like we're basing, a lot of us, it's not basing it around an aesthetic, it's based around a specific community. And those communities are always malleable and they're always fluid. On a reservation, it's very different. And there was something really important that someone said to me, which was, once they put them in reservations, they were no longer who they were. They were forced to accept the white man's ways, which is something that all Native Americans must come to terms with. Unless you are living in free land and you're roaming, you're nomadic, you don't really have a Native culture anymore. And 1804 Kids is about that. It's not, I'm from the Caribbean, so the way people deal with blackness in the Caribbean is very different than I think that the Black Power movement created here in America. In the Caribbean, because the 2 biggest theorists are Frantz Fanon and James Cesar, one's from Guadeloupe, I think, and one's from Martinique. For us in the Caribbean, we can't reclaim blackness. And the problem with reclaiming blackness is that you try to speculate on an idea that's pure, that doesn't really, that's been violated so many times. And basically what they're saying is that our identity is a product of histories and years of violence, and that violence is in the very fabric of who we are. I'm not going to speculate that it belongs in your DNA, but it's actually part of who we are. So saying that we can reclaim a certain blackness, it's very difficult to do because white violence is basically inside of us. So in the Caribbean, what most people do, and what Frantz Fanon did, obviously, I'm sure most of you are aware with it, is that he figured out how colonial trauma affects us through cases with his patients. His most famous case was these 2 Algerian kids in Algeria who killed a French boy while they were playing. That was one of his really famous cases, and it's a very ambiguous case, but you would think, oh, these 2 Algerian kids just killed a French boy, end the story. But to him, there's a history embedded in it, there's a trauma embedded in it that was passed on to these 2 kids. Willingly or not, whether they committed this crime. And for me, being a Dominican, being on the side of the spectrum that has the power, the Dominican Republic, obviously, this was the first island to institutionalize slavery. In America, like, the way they divided humans and non-humans was much more basic than it was in the Caribbean. In the Caribbean, it's like, I don't know how many categories of blackness they have in the Caribbean, but they literally have drops of blood to the 10th, whatever it is, describing what you are in society, basically. So it's much more specific, it's much more brutal. And because of that violence, I think is the reason why this person gave me so much shit in talking about my album. What she said was, well, first off, I should say this, he criticized me for being on Fader. He said, Fader is a white institution, why are you working with a white institution? And then secondly, he told me I should stop making art because the art world is a white institution. Which I was like, damn. Which I kind of agree with. I agree that the title of my album is unfair. The image is also like, a lot of my friends in New York, they emailed me back and they were like, wow, Kelman. Especially a lot of my people who go by women, mainly women of color. I know Dominicans and Bangladeshi women, which are my best friends. They were slightly offended, is what they said. Now, the problem with terming an album conceptually, it goes into, like, it's not that it's tacking it on, but it's forcing a concept that is like a vast history into a very specific kind of commodity. At the end of the day, this goes on iTunes. It doesn't go into the black platform. So there is a certain amount of commodification, and it's funny that I always have this conversation. I mean, I've always had this conversation with Sarah. Kerry James Marshall paints black images, but it is in the canon of painting, a European art form, and it is in the museum, which is not, for some of us, it's not. That's not our context. We don't care about being in the museums. That's not a black or brown context for us. That said, I love his work, and I think what he does is important, but that doesn't mean I'm gonna promote the canon of painting. So for 1804, in the Caribbean, sorry this is so long-winded, in the Caribbean, reggaeton and dembow has been replaced by música urbana, urban music. It's a very vague title. It's trap music. Trap music has become global. There's white kids in Switzerland doing it, totally out of context. In the Caribbean, kind of makes sense for there to be trap music, but what it's done is that it's gotten rid of a specific vibration and a specific rhythm that is actually uniquely much more in tune with blackness than trap music is. Trap music is from Atlanta. It's from Chicago. It's not from anywhere else. And it's specific to that specific context. So what I did was, against my own will, was I tried to retrace my steps being in 7th grade and listening to these kind of dembow and reggaeton tapes, which to me, like, I know in LA it's different, but when I was in 7th grade, like, we were in house parties, like, grinding, like, really early, and that was because we all lived in the projects. That's how we went to house parties, and we throw on these tapes and we dance. Like, that was our thing, and that's slowly being erased with urban music, which is basically a translation of trap music into Spanish. So that's the reason for doing it. Whether it's successful or not, or whether I give in to a white institution, as someone would say, into Fader, is arguable, and they probably have a reason for saying that. But yeah, that's like the long-winded answer for that.
What like attracted me to this album is the fact that it's about like blackness kind of like filtered through technology.
Yeah.
It's about reggaeton through synthesizers. It's about even the photo of it, like the image, like the central image being kind of blurry, but off to the side, someone taking a snapshot or something. Like these ways of just kind of like just filtering through like the chops, and like just kind of like this way of like producers and DJs having the power to add on, detract, isolate, and like that power within blackness, and like being interested in like, and so like leading off that, I'm really curious if you could go into Rayla and about like this idea, and like how you mentioned how these beats came out of Rayla, and if you could talk about that experience of like, Raylab's interesting because there'll be some Raylabs where it's so black, and I'll go, and there'll be some Raylabs where it's so white. And I'm just like, what is going on? And so I'm wondering, I don't want to like, try to like, I'm not trying to like, bad Raylab. I'm just trying to say like, what is, like how do you relate to that? Like what does that add to the vibe of the party? Like,
it does, I mean, like we take complaints seriously. Seriously, like, get these white model hoes out of it. Like, can't really tell someone to leave. That's not the point. It depends who you advertise with. If you advertise with, sorry if anybody's here from Restless Nights. If you advertise on Restless Nights, you're gonna get white, whatever those terms is, you're gonna get white, normie, model girls, whatever that is. And it depends on where you have them. When we had them in Lemur Park, not many black people came. When we had them in Lincoln Heights, like, I guess it's easier. It's closer to Hyde Park.
Cockroaches just crawling out of the woodwork.
Say it again?
Cockroaches crawling out of the woodwork.
So I think it's like anything else. I think it depends on the context. It depends on where you place it. There was also a point where Rayla was really heteronormative. So I just think it takes, I don't really know how, I mean, it's a party. It's not like, I understand that it's a space, but I also get worried when people say like, oh, this is a political space for us to act out these sort of political expressions, which is like, it's cool, but and dancing for sure is political, but there's also much more agency that we can be taking into account. This, for example. And I know Sarah has.
Yeah, I told him.
Yeah.
I said, I'm not going back to Rail Up because there's too many white people. I went from 4 Rail Ups ago where, you know, it was different. It wasn't like the white, everybody's got, and people of color all have that 1 to 5 or to 30 white people that they're cool with. So they're like, oh, they're cool with me, so I'm going to bring around my people of color friends. But yeah, Rail Up, the reason why I told him that was because that one that you did at Restless Nights at the spot where the cops came and got shut down, I had all these white bitches like bumping into me, getting in my way when I was used to it, to my presence being revered and respected, and being given the space to express myself and not worry about all the white bullshit. And so that's why I stopped going.
Well, I mean, I'm just gonna relate that back too, because you made a statement about Carrie James Marshall and the museum context, and also the context of painting being a white one, and or not like, you know, painting being like a Eurocentric or European medium, and I just like, I mean, I think about Carrie James Marshall's like activism as being partly kind of connected to what Sarah just said, as in like, you know, being aware of my presence, being worthy of being revered, and entering that space to just make that clear, and not having like, not a, you know, it's not an assimilation to want to be seen. I think that there's a lot of ways that that becomes problematized, especially now, in this time in which like imagery, or like, you know, we're making so many more images than have ever been made in the history of this world. But like when a black person or artist wants to call out to confirm that they're not alone, or to take up space where that space hasn't been taken up before, that's not to be poo-pooed. And that's also what, you know, that's what music, like, you know, black music has always been, is activism, taking up literal airwaves and taking up space in people's homes to make that presence clear. It's not strictly about using white inventions and white institutions to gain access. It's about literally taking up any space where blackness can be and thrive and be respected. And
For
that's
sure.
kind of
and
just,
I totally agree with you. I think I have a different, I guess maybe I have an emotional, because I DJ'd the opening for that show. So the reason why it's not that I have a problem with that show. Like I said, I think his work is amazing. He's one of the greatest painters, whatever that's worth to people in terms of visibility. But the thing is, like, who is it visible for? That museum won on all facets that day because, one, they pretended that this is a diverse institution. There were so many black people at that opening. So they won in that sense, and they were like, oh, look how great. And a lot of the comments I heard is like, look how cool this is today. It literally was, it's not that it literally was, but there was a certain amount of expectation I wasn't comfortable with at that moment. And I feel like Carrie James Marshall, like, I've known about him for such a long time, and I don't understand why it took so long for him to get to this place. That's also one of my problems.
But to get to Mocha, not to get to the world.
But
Mocha
is not the world. Mocha is.
No, I know. Like
yeah.
that's I know. Like I know, but I don't know. I think that's really hard to hear. That's all I'll say.
No, for sure.
Like,
it's not. It's a very, like, every time. I mean, I teach graduate school, and when I tell my black students to stop painting, they look at me like I'm crazy. And it's not that I'm.
You told me that too.
It's not that it's like there's certain battles. Like,
I'm sorry. I'm like shock value.
And it's not like it's not that
You told your kids to stop painting?
Yeah. I told them.
Did you tell them to replace you know, their interest with something with a different grandeur or history.
I mean, yeah, there's more options than two.
I think it's important to know that making your art as a person of color alone is not going to mobilize Black people, obviously.
Yeah.
And I think there's this illusion that I express myself and someone will see it and then they'll express themselves and all the Black children express themselves. And it's like, no, that's in a capitalist system, that's not going to happen because you are operating in a white format of capitalism.
Exactly. I understand that. I understand that.
The illusion that expressing yourself as a Black person alone is a high contribution to mobilizing Black people is false.
Like every word that falls out of our mouth or every tear that falls onto a canvas is not going to that's not going to open up the gates of heaven.
It's not active.
But it's I mean, I'm not saying that, and I also don't want to be petty enough to be like, but it's something. It's more than just something. It's about that's a resistance in of itself is to want to be seen and heard as any person of color.
But I feel like Black painters have been around for so long that we don't need white validation. Like Kevin and Bradford are already on, like, they're the canons of what that is.
But you can't do or not do something based on how a white person will react to it. At the end of the day, I feel like maybe I'll debate whether or not a white person sees this particular thing, and the way you engage it is something that people are carving out currently in a way that feels, I guess, more active for them. But I had a conversation with a friend and she said, I don't want to create more images of Blackness for white people to consume. Exactly. And I was trying to figure out, you know, like, yeah, I don't want to make consumable Black consumption. I love it. Oh my gosh, it's amazing. It's Black. I love it. I'm living. I'm dying. I do.
Especially,
I don't. Because I also don't want to not do the thing I want to do because white people are going to see it.
Especially in lieu of the fact that music and airwaves, and this is so not a drag because I'm anticipating like engaging with the album too. But it's like music itself. I had a teacher that said like let all the white people say nigga and nigger because like it's out in the music and the airwaves go everywhere. I was like, that's fucking like crazy. But then I was like I had to consider the fact that music is something that enters the mind on a subconscious level without our even presence there. It's like so like to make sounds, like it's like you see like how that kind of just that feels sort of tense or like that seems to be like a little reductive.
I wonder if it's like also like understanding where you're coming, like understanding where everybody's coming from, but there's this thing of like, and I feel like this like girl, we've like been on the bus like yelling at one another talking about this about like our work ain't doing shit, we ain't doing shit because we ain't been into the hands of the people that it needs to be in, and like it's not even that, it's that like we're not doing what we need to do to actually interact with like you like.
Yeah.
And no, but it's like not like stop painting, but like sit down and figure out what are you doing and be real with yourself and what are you actually doing, and is your little painting actually doing something? It could be like what we were saying about Carl Walker. It's not what it is, right. It's where it is.
It's where it is.
Like so many niggas, like so many art niggas right now. I don't want to make images of blackness for white people and stop fucking with white people, dumbass.
But this is it's just I operate under the sense that it's impossible, essentially, because back to like Black people, I feel most comfortable with queer Black femmes. I would only like queer Black femmes to own my artwork, but that's not, or to consume and own it, but that's not the way it is. Like some Black person be like, yo, white partner, check out this art. So the chain has been broken. But what I did, so the chain has been broken. And so what I did is like, I painted my vagina and I wrote on the back of it that it's not for sale. There's no money exchanged. And the only people, and I wrote on the back of it like, only Black femmes will only own this piece ever.
And you're vocal about it.
And I hope that maybe, I hope that only Black women own it, but then like, if some white person gets it in their hands, my fucking spirit's gonna haunt the fuck out of them. And they're gonna be like, get out of my hands.
That leads me to the question I was gonna ask you.
The segue.
So, your work deals so much with Black femme intimacy.
Yeah.
And like intimate moments of being alone, intimate moments of being like hurt, intimate, because like moments that someone wouldn't usually share about themselves. And I think that's a part of what makes it so powerful. And it's, for example, this piece or journal, it's your actual journal, right?
Yeah,
like
I spent 20 hours straight. Yeah, I risographed the entire fucking journal.
So my question is like how
Nobody cares.
Relate to
a lot of fucking work, guys.
I care. There's a lot of white girls that care. Oh. This past week, a lot of white girls told me they want to buy it.
They should want to. I have a website. My PayPal is on it. Don't tell them to tell me. Don't tell you. They're just trying to get away with not buying it.
My question is, do you sell this, like, how, like, with
how do I
that
sell
is like
things?
this, like, do you sell this journal to white people?
Oh yeah,
do
so
you,
the way it goes,
like, how do you see it, like, do you want to only see the journal sold in Black spaces?
No, because at the end of the day, I'm a humanist. And I believe, I know, I was like, it's gonna all the Black people, I believe that we all have a right. I believe that ultimately in sharing my humanity with people, that it will inspire themselves to love themselves and love others more and express themselves more. I did not cut that off from white people, from their growth, but I did my efforts are geared towards Black people. Like, besides the paintings and the zines and the shit, like, when shit goes down, I'm not calling a white person and saying, "Are you okay?" I'm calling my Black trans femme friend, you know? And so, I mean, like, it's $30, that's for white people. If you're Black, man, just like give me some weed and a hug, and it'll be $5. You know what I'm saying? Like it could be free. You know, it's not. I prefer that Black people just consume my art and share with each other. But white people, I don't really give a fuck as much because I don't care about you sharing it with other white people.
Could I? Okay. Can I have a moment? I was just wondering, like. I mean, okay, so I just gave a talk to a diverse crowd of people in this room, like, and I think that for one, the subject matter brings POCs like to the front, and always has in like other talks that I've done. But like, what do you think about either of you guys? Because I know you're both educators in your own right. What do you think about presenting your narrative? Black narratives, Black art, or just like being generous with yourself to an audience as an educator? Because like for me, it's like I think that part of, I mean, I also make art. I'm a writer. I literally cannot dictate who buys like the poetry, like, cause it's on my white publisher's website and it's just getting bought up. Of course, I'm like I plug it everywhere I can and be like, you know, like it's definitely the story of a brown queer person, like, you know, of a trans femme's like voyage and what the fuck I've been through. But like as an educator, there is a distinction where I'm trying to like kind of I make my history the center, but I can't. I feel like sometimes I can't even like I can't prevent. I can't change the diversity of its witnesses. What do you think about like yourself as an educator and who you're gearing to teach? Because I know that Black people, and I'm sure everyone knows that we have no obligation to teach white people anything about ourselves or about our histories or about like the world even as it is. But I still think that that's my activism. And sometimes, especially right fucking now, I feel pretty stupid about it. I'm not gonna lie, but I'm like curious as to like two educators here. Like, what do you think about that?
Well, I don't sell art, and it has to do with stuff as commodities, which is a different discussion. Also, the reason I'm making this. I make videos on the reservation, so there would be for me personally, it'd be ethical issues with me selling images of people whose history has been decimated by, I mean, they are literally, I don't even know how to say it, it's not, they live in an open air prison and they are, like, I don't know how to say this, they have a physical reaction when they see a white person, Native Americans, and this specific reservation, Pine Ridge, which is where Wounded Knee happened. So the history there is much more violent than in other places. And I make archive videos there, so selling videos would be out of the question unless a specific stipulation that me and them agreed on.
Do you make videos in DR?
In the Dominican Republic? I used to make videos about my family. That's how I first started making art. But I don't make videos about my identity because when I graduated from school, an art gallery told me like, well, you need to make like videos about who you are because I can't sell that you're not famous, and that's what sells. So I was like, not doing that. So that's obviously I'm speaking from my specific interactions with the art world, which are very different for other people, but I chose not to go that route. But when I show videos about that reservation, I don't ever feel the need to explain anything to anyone. If they don't understand the context of that history, that's on them. And Lakotas don't feel like they need to explain stuff to me either when I go up there. My identity is separate from my art, I'm trying to figure that out on a more practical level instead of on a more art lets me be irrational, and I don't want to figure out my identity in an irrational way, so I'm still figuring that out.
Sarah? Yeah. No, I'm good. I kind of have to pee.
I mean, you go ahead, Lily.
Can I go pee?
Yeah, you can pee.
Okay.
I mean,
Wait,
I'm not the dictator.
Kelman to answer this question though. Aren't you an educator though?
That's what I was.
You teach kids.
Yeah,
Talk about that.
You know, being in the art world is not, like having a Q&A is different than being in a university. I think there's a different audience. When people come see you at a theater, there's a certain limit to the types of things I think you can talk about.
I mean, you work in higher education, and that's not in a theater, and I've given talks and educated outside of a theatrical or art space. So, yeah. I mean, speaking directly to that.
I mean, I teach continuation school also, like high school students, and I think the reason why I'm so, not that I'm against it, but the reason why I don't teach art that has to do with a specific skill, it has to do with class and resources. For painting, you need resources. The kids that I teach, I taught at an all-girls school in South Central, and I taught those girls how to make videos and about conceptual art in half an hour. Like, they have so many insecurities that I think there's a right way to do something. There's a right way to look at a painting. There's a right way to draw. And as soon as I got the idea that there is no right way to do anything, and that art, as long as you know how to speak about it, and that it comes from your own personal subjective experience, their minds were literally blown. And we made a video and we showed it at the Hammer, and it was like, I mean, whether it was good or bad, it doesn't matter. They understood contemporary art better than people who've gone to school for years. So for that, of course, I go all in, but if I was giving a lecture at CalArts, I'm not gonna, there's a certain distance and a limit to the type of information I think I give out.
I did have more questions, but I think this is fine.
This is it?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, y'all did. Okay, I keep going. I got more questions.
Hard ones.
Let me get a beer.
Hard ones. This one right here. This one right here.
Okay, I'll keep it pushing.
Give us some hard ones.
I don't people have to pee. I don't know. Okay.
Answer? Answer to all of them.
So I got any questions?
I'm
just kidding. I wasn't kidding.
Yeah, I mean, okay, I'll ask one more question to you all.
Okay, thank you, Jasmine.
Okay.
Open this with a pen.
What features reveal when blackness is a costume? Like, what do you look like? What characteristics do you point at to recognize like this person's doing like blackface?
Ooh.
The lips, the nose, the demeanor. You know, it's obviously you're not going to be a very calm, level-headed person who thinks about their thoughts. And, you know, you're not going to be calm and level-headed. You're going to either be entertaining or aggressive. And that's really just like what it is.
Yeah.
Blackface to me seems to be like any notion of you taking a context and making it your own when it's not yours to own. Like, so it's, and there's just so many, like, I love Teen Vogue's recent on, like, digital blackface. I was like, go the fuck off, because honestly, every time I see a white person post a meme with a black woman saying, yes! I'm like, you ought to just stop. Like, I know some white girls that were, like, that recently made, like, some fucking selfie that says something like, it was a white girl's picture, and she said, she's sickening fish. I was like, okay, let's just not, because I'm like, literally this language is calibrated for people, like the idea of fish, you know, like putting back on my fucking professor hat, but it's like imagining like fish being like a personification of the most ideal personification of what a cis woman can embody on a trans femme body. And being like, and this lily white girl's like, she's sickening fish. I'm like, that's just not gonna work. Like, it's like, that just won't work. Like, it's beyond it. It's like, it's beyond inaccurate. It really is an offense because there's so much pain in that consideration. Like, I myself, like, identifying as trans, like, I'm never trying to be fish. Like, I really am not. Like, I don't think that that's something that I can strive for. And it's not something that, like, I'm critiquing anybody for. But to see, like, a cis white woman assume that identity, I'm like, not only could you never, that you tried it. And that's fucked. And you need to just take a fucking seat. And so that's the blackface I'm coming for nowadays. Like, I'm like, take that mask the fuck off. Like, so, thank you.
It's so easy online.
It is. I'm like, end rant, but it's like every time like a white cis person, or just white people in general, just white people in general, like just like taking this shit. I'm like y'all just gotta stop. Like, I'm like, just cut it out. Like, quit projecting like, you know, like Beyonce's body into your into your tomfoolery.
I think that the problem really ultimately is that white people were raised with the idea that everything is accessible to them. That no stone can or should be left unturned by a white person. You know what I'm saying?
Not the rocks.
That's all the rocks.
Not the rocks.
You take them from the homeland and make them your own. Melt them down and turn them into socks.
Not a rock sock. Oh, stop.
You guys could make that a band.
The rock socks.
The rock socks. You guys have all these shitty bands. Come on.
God.
Rock socks is really good.
Wow.
The rock socks.
I'm right here with Sarah.
We'll just make our own band.
Shit called the rock socks.
Do you want me to answer that?
Talk about blackface. Especially the music club. I think there's so many times I'll think a DJ is a person of color, and it turns out they're
Oh my
a
god.
white boy in Minnesota. And I'm just like, damn, white boy, you really,
Oh yeah, like Sad Boy Gang.
I think ways of being are too complicated, and like Sarah says, like a lot of like violent discourse is on the fact that people think everything can be transparent and be characterized, which I think is really dangerous because that's why we have nationalism and not white nationalism. It's basically racist. It's not called white nationalism, but for me, a person's blackface is when they use a specific type of language, and it's obviously easy. Like, you see a lot of black sports commentators. They're so, I don't know how they've been beat down so much by white institutions, but the fact, like, even Colin Kaepernick, the fact that this is an issue, it's just like, it shows you the level that the sports world is at. I think my biggest example was, with language, was where I also, like, and I think we all do blackface and whiteface at certain instances, whether we don't want it or not, because I believe that is, like, because of the history of colonialism and slavery, that's not going to go away in 400 years. We're not going to shed that. Even our kids are going to have to deal with that trauma. I think this ex-girlfriend, she was Salvadorian, and she had married this black PhD professor from Princeton. And one time he was like, hey, I'll drive you to the bus. I was going back. And he was like, but wait, I gotta go to the record store real quick. And he went and bought a Lil Wayne Decada 3 vinyl. And I was just like, he looked at me, he was like, is there a problem? And I was like, yeah, it's weird. I just didn't think someone like you would listen to Lil Wayne or buy a vinyl. Like, nobody buys vinyls anymore. So you're obviously fetishizing Lil Wayne and this thing. And he was just like, you always gotta remember where you come from, little nigga. And I was just like, okay.
Wait, what?
Yeah, I mean, he got rude with me. He got rude with me. I was really young, yeah. But he was like, he's a PhD professor who for me, I was like, oh, you talk like a white guy, you dress in a suit, you're very formal. Like, he looked at me like, oh, this little homeless kid off the street that dates my daughter-in-law. But when it was just me and him, he acted very differently. And I was really taken by that, because I was like, here's someone who's obviously has to act a certain way because he is the director of some crazy place at Princeton, but has to fetishize, has to like constantly listen to ratchet music to remind himself where he comes from. So I think for me, that's the balance that I guess.
You said he was Salvadorian?
He married a white Salvadorian woman.
And he's African
American. Oh, okay. Because I was about to be like, well, that's not where you came from.
He's not down for that, but that's what it is.
He's from the West Coast.
I mean, but also I'm curious.
He's Creole.
Oh, okay. I'm also curious about. I mean, maybe I can pose this back on the audience so that like the questions can start to open up, but like, and not to overstep the moderator because you ate that. But I was just curious, like, is there a distinction between blackface and coding yourself, recoding yourself, to cater to how whiteness pervades in spaces? So it's like, you know, I always had to identify with Our Future for the too white for the black kids, too black for the white thing. That I always was like, so being an academic at heart, which is something that I really don't want to admit about myself, but obviously I just gave a talk about black art to all the people in this room. But like, I'm like, I feel like, well, actually, I'm sorry. I'm going to refer back to Geneva because you said something really visceral that I wrote down in my notes about like the more information you learn. I don't know if you want to like talk about that paradigm, but I was like, I really like, so the idea was, and I'm paraphrasing, but Geneva and I were talking about like this, and frankly, it was like the more information I take in, the more I feel like a coon. And I was like, gag, because like,
I don't know about that.
No, not like, I mean like, it operates on a different level. Like, it's not about like, just like a coon as in like what people like would consider like, you know, what cooning is. Like,
the more I understand the interpretations of appreciation in those ways. I'm not saying, not like blanketed statement applicable to every situation. I'm not making a blanketed statement to me in the shower washing my hair. I'm just saying, in certain situations, the more I learn, because I feel like I've been learning a wealth of knowledge just very recently. I recontextualized an experience that I had, and I'm like, well, I just thought we were all laughing at the same shit. I didn't realize you were laughing at this and I was laughing at that.
Right.
And the more I learn, it creates distinctions with the language I try to use with creating imagery, but the language I try to use with communicating myself.
Can I just say something real quick? But like we are totally on the same wavelength because our knowledge is filtered through the humanities. And like, for example, in college, English is a major, but Africana Studies, what is it?
A minor.
It's a minor, or
or a
if you're
discourse.
lucky, or a discourse, or some, and it's because of that.
It's a notch on like on a university's bell to be
and
like
that's what I mean.
scratched
Like
off
even
for
something so simple as language. Like for example, like I recently realized that English is a diminutive language. In South Dakota, for example, like their English is additive language. October is the moon of changing seasons. It's much more descriptive. It's not built in dialectics. And the one time that I learned this is like, I'm a heteronormative person. And when I went to South Dakota, they said something, they use like a derogatory term for trans people, which is winktas in South Dakota.
What was that?
Winktas. Winktas is what they call them.
Wait, what?
How you spell it?
W-I-N-C-D-S.
C-D-S?
Winktas?
Yeah, winktas.
Winktas.
So of course.
What the hell? Wait, what does that come from?
Yeah, so literally it translates into two spirits, into...
Oh.
Yeah, and it means that...
Is it derogatory then?
For me it was derogatory because I'm a Westerner, and this is what I mean, like this is how I translate it, but then they're like, no, this means that this person's special and they have two spirits.
Oh, hell.
And I was like, okay, untranslatable to me. Yeah, it was just me coming from a place that I should have...
Where the language itself was, yeah, exactly, to get up in arms. I feel that. That's what higher education did to a lot of like things. Like recently I told my mom, like, everyone should know this. I'm sorry, like maybe you don't, maybe someone doesn't care. But the Robin Thicke song, the Blurred Lines, I was like, this is a rapey ass song, Mom, don't play this shit. And she was like, some things are just not that fucking deep, Jahmal. And I was like, damn, I had to sit my ass down just in that moment being like a person that was immersed in this sort of education that would allow my language to be so for granted in that moment that I could like, and it's not to say, I still think it's a rapey ass song and I still think that it should be taken off the air entirely because it promotes rape culture, but it was just the fact in the moment the exchange was so generational and it was so education classist that I was privileged enough to like have the education that I have, that my mother like is extraordinarily brilliant, but still it's just like, Jahmal, like really we have to bring it there. I just like the fucking song. And I was like, I can't take that away from her.
Yeah, but I think that it goes back to the delineation between blackface, white art, black art. You know, there's all kinds of different, not open, all different kinds. But with a lot of white art, my distinction with my art and like what I would say with my art and white art is that there's some soul in it, and that like a lot of things like abusive family dynamics and all these things, because they've just been so ingrained in us that a lot of people are like, oh, we should be used to it, is also we should be used to art that has nothing behind it. And so I guess, and I didn't answer the blackface question, or maybe I did, but I guess blackface to me, because back in the day, a year ago, blackface was just, you know, regular old blackface. Now there's like new ones. Nuance.
Yeah.
Is creating something that you don't know shit about. Because when I paint, like what I'm about to start painting, a painting of two black women embracing and a heart in the background, very simple, but there's so much depth to it when I paint this, because black film, loving a black film is something that has just been so torn down and so minimalized and erased and whatnot, that for a white person to paint the same exact shit that I was painting would be rude as fuck, because they didn't experience it. They didn't know that what I had to go through to even come to the place to love a person who looks like me so much. Because I had to come from hating or a person who looks like me.
Well, painting from fascination is really different than painting from experience.
Yeah.
And that can be categorized in different ways depending on what you're painting, but because people look at objects in a blanketed way when they have the privilege of doing so, because they don't have to engage things in coded ways or in subdued ways, or they don't, you know, have to, they don't have to adopt unnatural ways of being in order to feel respected and feel like respecting themselves. You can apply the same thing to a bicycle as you can to like a black body. Like, what comes from stop exist? Let's do it. Throw it in there. Why is it a big deal? You showed me your black body. You're like, you need to contextualize these things, and shame on me for expecting you to do that. I learned not to engage you in this way, but it's out of my control to make you do that thing. That doesn't mean it's any less wrong.
Yeah. Okay, and here's my last question, and then I'm going to open it up to the audience. Anybody has any questions? So, a large theme between the panelists' work is collage and mixing and putting iconography that wouldn't usually be next to each other, and juxtaposing all these things. And I feel like a lot of Blackness for me is about the collage of all these different time periods of like the future and like the past and all of this kind of conjecting into one place, which is like how spirituality also goes too, like three sides of the triangle, all these different things, and you're in the center. So I'm wondering about how, like thinking about like using that as like a kind of like a little tiny framework or foundation. I'm wondering if y'all can talk about the use and the role of blending and collage in your works. For example, where do you source your music for mixes? Like, is it from like a memory of a childhood of hearing this song, or is it like through finding the song later in life online? And for your zines, like when you find images, or if you even when you collab with people, which is for me a collage in a way of collaborating, like for images and things. What is kind of guiding that? What's guiding your aesthetic eye when it's about cutting and pasting and blending other works? And for you, when you're putting together that great, I don't know what it was called, like the packet, images, the packet, like how were you organizing things spatially? Like it was such a beautiful like spider web. Like how did you put the connections together to help you guide the lecture?
Well, I'm gonna pee this time because.
Okay, you go pee. I make Caribbean music, so I source my stuff from the Caribbean. Mostly music that is termed inappropriate, that being dancehall or reggaeton, with all the problems that those musics have. Dancehall being obviously having an extreme colorism problem right now with bleaching, and it's always had an extremely anti-gay and anti-trans, anti-queer stance. Nevertheless, I still play it. And I have gotten people who told me to shut it off. And I change the song if that ever happens, it's not a problem. But to talk about, if I'm gonna go contradict myself, but if I was to pick like a source that was the ultimate iteration of like a deep blackness, it'd be like my favorite artist is Big Mama Duran. She's a blues artist because blues is, I think, like one of the most special music, being that it comes out of slavery and it comes all the way from, came across in the ships. And the reason is Big Mama Duran because when she first started out, she started out as a mammy. Her hair was done, and she was really big, whatever that means. And as her career went by, she started doing a lot of drugs. She was super skinny and smoking cigarettes on stage and wearing a cowboy hat. It was a middle finger to everyone that she had. So she went from this time where you had to act like a black person because the Black Power movement hadn't come out yet, to literally being an outlaw. And it's like, it was a very important transformation to see, and the fact that she's a blues artist, and just, I mean, like, if you ever listen, it's just, so that's like my foundation. However fetishistic that sounds, because it is a problem.
My foundation is based off of what I see and what I want to see in the world. I hear from a lot of people since the beginning of time, when I was born in 1990. That sounds really egotistical, but I mean, you know, in my time, the beginning of my earthly Sarah Gail time. Yeah, I just paint what I see, what I've seen in my mind's eye, and what I want to see. And I'm doing an experiment to see if what I write And it has been happening. If I write it down and I want it to happen, or I paint it and I want it to happen, it happens. And so I'm just ultimately, I'm just gonna keep like using with whatever medium. Mediums don't matter to me. It's just like the way in which I want to express myself, in the ways in which the audience interacts with the work. And so I plan on using every single medium that I can get my hand on in order to get my point across, but ultimately I seek to create a world that I see that a lot of people don't want in the world. Yeah.
I was just thinking about how I need to include straight children in my presentation.
Oh, thanks!
that was the real Carrie. I'm sorry. I was like, yes. Send me the HD PDF.
It's just on the website. Jasmine's on the website. SarahGail.net.
Yeah. I'm carrying. I am convinced that the world is bound by a series of small knots. I think that there's a rhyme scheme that we are all in tune of, but a lot of us reject. I'm not so convinced that deja vu is a phenomena, it is a sense. I think that the way I think about art and what I make, you know, this was structured in an analytic way. My poetry, my recent collection, so to speak, because I guess like it would be something that someone can like look at for what it's worth. It's about sentiments, and it's about me extracting from within myself an index that there is a future potential in myself, and that there was something before it as well. And in that, I reject the present. And so I just am hyper aware of this idea that like everything is not happening for a reason, that it is actually bound to a structure. And that is entirely out of my control. And in that sense, as much uproar and dismay I could force myself into with the state of the world as I know it, I cannot confirm that this is something that can be impacted. I'm actually witnessing as opposed to dissociating. That's my piece.
Beautiful. Thank you all. So good.